Welcome to this latest video where we're going to take a look at weathering. Most modelers, we buy our rolling stock and we put it on the track, and we're quite happy with that, and we like to watch it run around and everything looks nice and new. Yes, you can buy some products ready to run that have a degree of weathering on them, but for me, I like to take it that one step further. Weathering provides detail, makes things look a little bit more realistic. So we're just going to have a look along the layout here to see how this is achieved. Okay, so on buildings, we use shadings and we apply what we call dry brushing to try and add dirt and build up and deterioration. On locomotives here, you can see this is a class 25 that I weathered myself, applying dirt, soot and the like. Wagons, build up of dirt and accumulation onto buildings as well with aging and weathering, and it's all about providing that little bit of detail just to make everything look that little bit more realistic. The more realistic you make it, I think that increases your satisfaction overall, and it always looks that little bit more impressive on the layout. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a little look and see how we achieve weathering on some locomotives. See you shortly. Okay, so we're going to be weathering this class 25 locomotive. To do this, we're going to be using the Revel weathering set, which costs around about £15, which is quite good. Set of paintbrushes. We want a container with a small amount of water, something to actually create washes on. A little goes a long way. And we have a container to catch any excess powder as we're weathering up the locomotive, because no point wasting it, this can all still be used. So what we'll do is we'll begin with a black wash. Okay, so these powders do really go a long way. They're really good value for money. I've actually weathered all of my stock apart from these couple of new additions, and I've hardly used any of the pigment, so it's really good. So first of all, we're going to apply a black wash over the locomotive, and what this does is it will give us some definition around things like the grills and the rivets, any specific panels and so on and so forth. And it just dulls down that paintwork just a little bit, just to emphasize a little bit of age, a little bit of natural dirt, and it helps things just stand out that little bit more. So all we're going to do that then is we'll take some of our pigment, place it onto our little tray here, apply some water, and literally all we're going to do, brush off a little bit of the excess. We're just going to work this in over the loco. Doesn't have to be neat or anything like that. Just work it in, brush it over the top. Over the cab roof. Doesn't have to be neat. A little bit down the sides here. on the underframe. Work it into the bogies a little bit here. Okay, there we go. Then, using a soft piece of tissue, wipe over the top. So you want to be trying to use the natural run, so you can see I'm going across the roof and not along the roof. Typically the water will be running in that direction. And then on the side panels here, you just want to run roof down. And rub off as much as you like. It's up to you how dirty you want your locomotive to be. Don't let anyone judge you on it. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. Repeat across the two end panels and on the other side. So I'm going to go do that just now. Be back in a moment. Okay, so here we are. I've now completed all the sides with the black wash. You can see how much it helps things to stand out. Gets right into all the joints. All the rivets are standing out. Panel joins, so on and so forth. So quite pleased with that. That's good for a base. And now what we'll do is we'll move to start fading out some of the paintwork. So we've done the black wash over the locomotive, and that gives us a good degree of definition. Okay, now that that's dried off a bit, you can see it's highlighting all the rivets. We're getting a little bit of downward wash coming off of those as well as the panels, so it gives really good definition. Next stage, what we need to do now is start actually building up the weathering in layers. So to do this, what we'll do first is we'll fade the paintwork that we want to fade, and then we'll start applying the pigment colours on top of that. There's no more washes to perform at this stage. Everything is dry brushing with the powder pigments. Okay, so you can see I've got my tub of white here, and now we're just going to start using that over the locomotive. So for this, you want a relatively stiff brush. A little goes a long way, so be very, very careful with this. So I'm going to fade around about the roof line. It's easier to build this up rather than trying to take it away. And what you're doing is you're actually pushing the pigment in to the bodywork. Okay, and then gently rubbing that down. Like I said at the start, this is a very, very messy process. it's up to you where you want to weather. Try to have a look at some pictures online, give you a rough idea of how things actually look. Depends on how old you want the locomotive to look as well. So if you're going for maybe like an ex-works condition, the paintwork could be suitably really good, and in that case you might want a very light weathering. Whereas if you're trying to model a loco that's maybe coming to the end of its service, it's maybe a bit more deteriorated state then. Okay, and just give the loco a little bit of a blow. Don't worry too much about the rest of the excess. We can just gently brush this out of the way because this is all going to be covered up with other pigments shortly anyway. So this is why we start with the fading of the paintwork, because it's the brightest of the colours. There we go, I'm happy with that. I'm going to go and do the rest of the sides and we'll come back shortly. Okay, so all sides are now faded. Spin that around for you there. So we've faded down the paintwork. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to work on the rust. Okay, because rust will usually come first, and then we can add the weathering over the top. Now to do this, we now need a smaller brush. I've got the red, which is our oxides, and this one's a little bit more painstaking. A little goes a long way again, but it takes a little bit of work. So really what you need to do here is decide whereabouts you want your rusting to be. So usually that's under panels, round window frames, or wherever there's things like rivets. Okay, so in this case I'm going to go under here, and hopefully you can see that in the video that we're now applying the red. You have to really push that in. So just to show you here, okay, you can see the rust here. It is painstaking, it does take a little while, so I'm going to go around all of the locomotive. One thing I would say as well is don't forget your under frames here. Okay, so you really want to be rubbing this in all around the axle boxes. Here you go. You can see that's quite an effect when you start applying the rust here. Sticks really well, gives a good coating into these bogies. So I'm going to go and do that. It's probably going to take me about 20 minutes, half hour. Then I'll show you the result. Okay, so you can see why we need something down on the work surface. The rust has now been applied, so here you can see that it's quite bright at the moment, but it will dull down once we start applying the other colours. So you can see axle boxes, bogies, grills, underneath some of the panels, wherever there's rivets, so along the top of the roof here, along the grills. Okay, and that's the same on the other side as well. There we go. So again, it just depends how heavy you want it to be. So what we're going to do now is we're going to progress and we're going to start adding some sand and some dirt. So we're looking now at greens, sand yellows and browns. I'll apply the next stage and then come back to show you how we go. So I prefer to start with the sand yellow first, only because of the brightness of the colour. And all we're going to do here is we're going to focus on the bogies themselves and just gently brush this in. It does take a little bit to brush this on. Again, it's easier to add more rather than try to take it away. You will just need to play around with this a little bit just to try and work this in. Some of you might be thinking that maybe I should have took the wheels out, but I'm looking at the face of the wheels when I'm doing this, and with the angle of the locomotive there's nothing actually dropping onto the backs of the wheels. The backs of the wheels are still perfectly clean here. Okay, so you don't actually need a great deal. This one's actually a relatively fast pigment to apply. So typically the dust itself will actually fall where all the dirt will actually accumulate anyway. And all you really need to do is really just brush that in just to reinforce that and get that right into those joins, and then that'll be a bit more realistic for you then. No harm here, I'm just using the excess that's fallen, no harm in doing that. There we go, that's the sand part done. Now we'll move on to the greens. So just before we move on to the greens, what you may wish to do at this point, because the dirt will naturally go over the grills, so you may wish, your preference, I've already applied some rust pigment onto the grill here. You can simply apply some black into that and just work that in. So I'm just going to tidy up my grills and then I'll go on to the greens. Okay, so you can see it's coming on quite well now. I've done the black on the grills just to highlight those out. Now literally we're just going to go on and do the greens. So in this case, again, you're just adding the colour into all those places. And all we're doing here is just building up the layers. Okay, now slight difference with this is we're going to start going on to the bodywork. This is really down to your own preference, how much spray. So typically, the loco's going forward, the spray will come up the side here, and same from the other direction. So what you end up with is kind of like the curve in shape as the spray washes along the side of the locomotive. Depends how heavy you want it to be. Okay, same on the other side. Okay, so there we go, quite happy with that. So this is why we don't throw anything away, because I've got some good coloration in this waste part here. So I'm just going to give this a little tap off. Okay, and now this is basically the rest of the coloration that I'm going to do. I'm not going to do the dark brown, don't want to take it too heavy, I'm just going to apply this one here. Okay, just give it a little tap. There we go, one weathered locomotive. The pigments don't really tend to transfer too much. They do just at the start, but tend to not to handle the locomotives too much anyway. Okay, you can see there we've got the arcing going up into the middle. Okay, dirt at the front, sweeping around the side up into the middle of the bodywork here. We've got our sand, we've got the rust. Okay, we've got the fading coming off the paintwork. So overall, quite happy at that. And we can now take that onto the layout, see what it looks like. So here we are out on the layout. Lighting helps bring out the colours a bit more. You can see we've got the fading, a little bit of enhancements. Overall, quite pleased with this. Not too heavy, but as you can see, for very little effort, take a little bit of pleasure in actually weathering up your own locos and enhancing your layout with a little bit more realism. Hope the video inspires you to have a go. Cheers.